Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2020. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect that Commissioners Decker, Goldsmith, Sobroff are present and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Turning to the agenda, item 1A. On the agenda, this is the revised use of force policy. I'll begin with a brief procedural history. I think most people in this room know, but on December 17th, the Commission heard, reviewed, and passed a provisional use of force policy aimed at updating the prior use of force policy to comply with state law, namely the passage of AB 392, which is found in, I'm told, Penal Code Section 835A. The board accepted the the proposed policy conditionally, as it wished to have a 30-day period of public comment. We did hear public comment on the 17th, but following the meeting, the Commission opened a portal to receive public comment for 30 days beginning December 18th of 2019. During that time, I understand the department also had meetings with some community groups or representatives from different groups specifically related to this matter. 2 press releases were issued by the Commission to ask the public to provide input. At the close of the comment period, the department was provided a copy of the comments, as was Commissioner Bonner and myself. We've all read the comments, discussed them with the department, and a number of changes have been made, which is on the agenda today, and that's the procedural history. Today, I'll first ask Mr. Tiefenk to summarize the public comment that's been provided and posted, and ask him to provide a summary so that those who have not had the opportunity to read that report are aware. I'll then ask the department to explain the changes before us today. Then we'll take questions from the Commission and the public, or public comment, I should say. Before we do that, I want to thank everyone who took the time to write in, all the organizations who wrote in. All the comments have been read. They were thoughtful. The comments provided context for the concerns and for the suggested changes. Everything was helpful in providing this Commission with information to develop a policy that's consistent with AB 392, that we have a policy that's clear for the officers and a policy that meets the expectations of this Commission. We greatly appreciate everyone who took the time to write and provide us important input. With that introduction, Mr. Tiefenk, would you please summarize the public comment?
Yes, Madam President. As you indicated, 15 responses were received. There were 12 organizations that responded, and each of those organizations had the same 5 recommendations for changes. Those organizations that responded were the Fair Chance Project, the Resistance Northridge Indivisible, Children's Defense Fund California, Behind the Arc Jewish Action Southern California Chapter, Community Coalition, Feminists in Action Los Angeles, Inner City Struggle, Advancement Project California, All Saints Church, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, National Lawyers Guild Los Angeles Chapter, the Brothers Sons Selfs Coalition. And their summary of the 5 recommendations were basically to include various sections from Assembly Bill 392. Would you like me to read all of those recommendations, ma'am?
Just in summary.
Okay, very good. And the recommendations were to highlight particular sections from Assembly Bill 392 that the authors of those letters felt were left out of the draft policy which the department presented to the Commission and the Commission approved. One of those is that they felt that it should have, by stating, quote, an officer shall use deadly force upon another person only when the officer reasonably believes, based on the totality of the circumstances, that such force is necessary. Change it to A, defend an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or to another person, or B, apprehend a fleeing person for any felony that threatened or resulted in death or serious bodily injury. There was a suggestion to change the header use of force general should be replaced with use of force non-deadly. Another recommended change was in the preamble should be revised to clarify that officers may use objectively reasonable non-deadly force to carry out their duties and may use deadly force only when necessary in defense of human life. Number 4, a requirement that de-escalation be set forth in the preamble. And number 5, the policy should remove the language on the top of page 2 that describes totality of circumstances and should mention the statutory authority. Another letter was received from the Leadership Conference Educational Fund, and they had a number of recommendations for changes, which were similar to those that were submitted by the other organizations. I won't go through and articulate all of those because they were similar. There was another letter that was submitted from the New York University Policing Project, and in their comments, they had similar comments along with some other recommendations relevant to training and also shooting at moving vehicles. And there were 3 communications from the general public. One, that the policy was acceptable, however, it would quite complex and require extensive training to fully implement. The second was under the shooting at moving vehicle section, a sentence should be revised to read, an officer threatened by an oncoming vehicle shall move out of its path instead of discharging a firearm at it or any of the occupants unless the officer's life or lives of others are in immediate peril and there is no reasonable or apparent means of escape. And the third community response was under policy, recommended change to use of force general to non-deadly use of force, and revise the first sentence so that it reads as follows. It is a policy of the department that personnel may use only that non-deadly force that is objectively reasonable. And under use of force deadly, recommend italicizing necessary. And those are a summary of the comments that were submitted. Upon receipt of those, as you indicated, they were submitted to the department for their consideration and to you, along with Commissioner Bonner as the representatives of the Board of Police Commissioners. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. I'd ask the department representatives to come forward and share with us the changes that have been made in light of your reflection of all these issues and public comment. Good morning.
Good morning. So, in response to the public comment, which as Elizabeth Rhodes and Commander Jeffrey Burt on behalf of LAPD.
OCPP.
The Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy. As Mr. Tiefenk said, many of the comments were the same from many different people who wrote in. I'm going to go through the policy as it reads, which is not the same way that the comments came in, but I think it would be helpful. The first change is to the purpose, and for the purpose we just added, so that everyone would be clear, that the bill, which was signed into law, is now found in the Penal Code, Section 835A. Thereafter, there were several comments about the preamble, and so we added 2 things. First, the word feasible was added to the de-escalation portion of the preamble, and that comes directly from the new Penal Code statute as well as Senate Bill 230, which has also been enacted into law but not required to come into force and effect until the beginning of next year. Second, based on public comment, we added the sentence, officers may use deadly force only when they reasonably believe, based on the totality of the circumstances, that such force is necessary in defense of human life. That comes out of Penal Code Section 835C1, and it's been added to the preamble. Going down to policy, the first thing we changed was to add the use of de-escalation techniques right into the policy. This is a new paragraph in the policy, but is not new to LAPD policies and practices. It was in fact taken from an LAP directive dated October 2016. Nonetheless, we felt it was better to put it directly into the policy as well. The next change is found at the top of page 2, and as Mr. Tiefenk indicated, Numerous comments indicated that use of force non-deadly rather than use of force general would be much clearer. And so the change here is at the top of page 2, use of force non-deadly. And then it goes on to outline what was previously in the policy. Going down to under the heading, factors used to determine objective reasonableness. If you look at the bullet points, the first one has been added, and that again is to emphasize the LAPD's policy and desire to use de-escalation. So the policy now has the first factor as, quote, the feasibility of using de-escalation tactics. Thereafter, the other factors remain the same. Thereafter, on use of force deadly, we listened and read the public comments, and we have changed the policy so that it reflects what is actually in the statute, and using the words in the statute, 835A C 1 and 2. And so that is now both what was in the public comment and is in the statute. We also added, on turning to page 3, in the first full paragraph, in determining whether deadly force is necessary, officers shall evaluate each situation in light of the particular circumstances of each case and shall use other available resources and techniques if reasonably safe and feasible. That comes from 835A A2, subsections A2. And again, it stresses the need for de-escalation here, even in the use of deadly force. The note adds, just because the application of deadly force is limited to the above scenarios, and then uses what an officer shall use deadly force or shall not use deadly force against a person based on the danger that person poses to themselves. The text of that was in the original policy, but the sentence leading up, or the phrase leading up to that, because the application of deadly force is limited to the above scenarios, is added. And that general comment comes out of 835A C2. Thereafter, we added the department's evaluation of deadly force and how the department will analyze it. Previously, we had talked about factors, but as the commission is well aware, the courts have not yet ruled on this new statute as it just went into effect at the very beginning of this year. And so the department will analyze an officer's use of deadly force by evaluating the totality of the circumstances of each case consistent with both the new California Penal Code Section 835A as well as those articulated in Graham versus Connor. The next change comes under the heading shooting at or from moving vehicles. And in line with some of the comments, what we did here was to put consistent with the policy in regard to the use of deadly force. There were some comments requesting that officers would not position themselves or do other things. Here, we thought it was best to make it just consistent with the entire policy, and we have already indicated that it is not done frequently. Turning to page 4, as I stated before, we added the definition of feasible, and that comes from Senate Bill 230, but because the word is used both in the statute, 835A, and in our policy, we thought it was important to do that. Finally, the totality of the circumstances, and this was something public comment made mention of. Totality of the circumstances is all facts known or reasonably perceived by the officer at the time, including the conduct of the officer and the subject leading up to the use of force. There were many comments indicating that that we should put, and we did put from the statute, the conduct between the officer and the subject leading up to the use of force. This combines both portions of the Penal Code, So it is both in the definitions, which is 835A E3, which talks about the definition of the totality of the circumstances, as well as 835A4. In addition, as a further restriction, the department added the word reasonably perceived rather than just perceived, because as the Supreme Court made clear in Graham versus Connor and its progeny, one needs to look at that from an objective point of view and not a subjective point of view. And so adhering to both federal and state law, we made that the definition of totality of the circumstances. If there are any questions.
Let me open it up to my fellow commissioners first, since Mr. Bonner and I had the opportunity to ask questions previously.
I just want to thank the members of the community who came forward to change the process that was laid out and to intervene with really extremely helpful, as Eileen said, comments and feedback. And I really appreciate the department's work in incorporating all of that. As far as I can tell, there isn't anything that is missing. So I really appreciate that work. And the commission, I wasn't here that day, unfortunately, but I was really glad to hear the commission extended the process to allow for more public comment. So thank you.
Perhaps that opens a question, Ms. Rhodes. Is there anything in the public comment that was not incorporated, just for our own clarity?
There were comments about, as I think I sort of mentioned, positioning oneself so that you are out of the way of a moving car. We thought that by adding just consistent with the deadly force policy, we did that. That is pretty much my understanding of that.
And I would point out too, also, commissioners, that the existing policy of shooting at or from moving vehicles states that an officer threatened by an oncoming vehicle shall move out of its path instead of discharging a firearm at it or its occupant. So I think it does incorporate the thought of the intention of this, which was many agencies across the country, that explicit policy, which was established here by LAPD in 2004, doesn't exist.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsmith, was there?
There's one more thing.
Prohibition of warning shots. There was a recommendation that the warning shots be prohibited entirely. We did not add that to the manual. Or strike. Excuse me. We didn't strike the use of warning shot.
And in looking at our existing policy, it's a policy of this department, just for the community that may not have the policy in front of them. Warning shots are a matter of great concern to the department, and our existing policy is that it is a policy of this department that warning shots shall only be used in exceptional circumstances where it might reasonably be expected to avoid the need to use deadly force. Generally, warning shots shall be directed in a manner that minimizes the risk of injury to innocent persons, ricochet damages, or dangers and property damages. And as you look at our history in the last 10 years, it's my off the top of my head recollection that the number of warning shots been fired are less than a handful of all of our instances of which deadly force has been utilized.
Thank you for that context, Chief. I appreciate it. Commissioner Goldsmith, was there anything else? Commissioner Soboroff?
No, I'm happy with the results, but I'm happier with the process, and the fact that the process contributed to the changes, the redlining, and I'm sure not everybody got everything that they dreamed of, but I think that the process was really well done.
Thank you. Before I open it up to public comment, I will just add, commissioners, for your background, that Commissioner Bonner and I have been talking to the department, as Ms. Rhodes indicated. There are further state law changes that need to be implemented by January 1st, 2021. And we've been talking to the department about having a process during the year for which we become further educated about what those changes need to be, and a timeline so that at the end of this calendar year, December 2020, we will have all of those changes before us and an opportunity for public comment for those changes in the future. And with that, I think given all the comments already today, why don't I open it to public comment? Are there public comment cards, Madam Secretary?
Yes, we have 9 speakers.
9 speakers.
The first 3, Samuel, and I'm sorry, I can't read the last name, Sinyangwe. Second speaker, Michael Novak, followed by Jonathan Foster.
The first card, did the person understand Samuel? Oh, very well.
Hello, good morning. My name is Sam Sinyangwe, co-founder of a national police reform organization called Campaign Zero. Over the past 5 years, we have examined data on officer-involved shootings and other use of force incidents across the country, built the most comprehensive database of police-involved killings called Mapping Police Violence, and used the data to understand what are the policies and practices in the context of use of force that have a significant impact on reducing police shootings. Some of those principles and policies are incorporated into this document, into this draft. Others are missing. So I want to call your attention to 2 aspects of the policy where it could be strengthened according to best practices we've seen in other jurisdictions. The first is recognizing that while there are some new restrictions here on deadly force, with regard to non-deadly force, there still is not the higher standard that we've seen in other departments. For example, in San Francisco, officers are required to use the minimum amount of force necessary, which is defined as the lowest level of force within the range of objectively reasonable options. In this LAPD policy, there is not that requirement articulated in the policy. Rather, it says officers may use objectively reasonable force to deal with the situation, and leaves that ambiguous without requiring that it actually be the lowest level of force within the range of objectively reasonable options. Because there are so many more use of force incidents that are classified as non-deadly than deadly, that means that this policy, while it restricts some of the most egregious forms of force, for the vast majority of force incidents, it's actually not imposing the same requirement that a department like San Francisco PD does require on their officers. So I'd recommend that that be strengthened. The second piece is just clarifying in the deadly force section where it specifies the conditions under which officers are authorized to use deadly force. It allows for officers to use deadly force when dealing with a threat of death or serious injury, an imminent threat, and to apprehend somebody who is fleeing, who presents that threat. It does not specifically, in the language of that policy, require that all reasonable alternatives be exhausted prior to deadly force being authorized. That requirement is true in the Stockton police policy. It's true in San Francisco police policy. It's true in Philadelphia police policy. It should be adopted here as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I think the first thing we should recognize is that this adoption of a new policy was forced upon you by the state law that was passed, and it reflects the fact that the existing policy and the existing training resulted in needless deaths of people shot and killed by the LAPD. Second thing is that you're still not dealing with the things that need to be dealt with in such a policy. For example, it says that reasonableness will be determined based on the articulated facts from the perspective of a Los Angeles police officer with similar training and experience in the same situation. That's not an objective criterion. That's a subjective criterion based on the experience and training of the officer involved. And if the officer's training or experience is inadequate, you should be judged on the inadequacies, not by somebody with the same training and experience. In terms of the use of force deadly, you talk about the threat of serious bodily injury, and then serious bodily injury is defined as, but not limited to, loss of consciousness. You're saying that an officer is entitled to use deadly force if they think somebody's going to get knocked out. That's outrageous. And then finally, it authorizes the use of deadly force for someone who is fleeing if you think reasonably that they're going to inflict possibly death or serious bodily injury unless apprehended. And so you're talking about shooting people in the back. So I think that this policy reflects the fact that there's an underlying basis and problem with policing, which is that you're giving people the power of life and death, and that it has consistently been used, in fact, in racially discriminatory ways, and the people who are the victims of deadly force reflect the fact that black and brown and poor people are seen inherently as a threat and the subject of reasonable fear by the department.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster.
Hi, Jonathan Foster. This still is on a reasonable officer, so that's so gray. The word changes almost don't mean anything, even though I appreciate it. My comments are, how or when can you or the people know if they are part of a racist police officer crowd that unknowingly gets hired, is a no one knows racist, and then gets a gun? You said 12 organizations commented. I missed the number of individuals that commented because it seems like not a lot of people. And we need the entire LA County to vote on these policies. And these policies need to become more clear where scenarios are described and behavior is described, how the police should act. And then that should be agreed upon and then voted on by everybody. Right now, still a very limited number of people are deciding how this public service that operates in secrecy, how this public service should act. If and when I have complained to officers, I am told, if I don't like it, go change the law. But look how difficult it has been to get this law and protocol to change, how much opposition there is from the police to change as police all over LA and the nation continue to kill. Now, I watched the Machete video and then Victor Valencia. And when you engaged Victor Valencia, the officers did not have head-to-toe body armor, and then you killed somebody. And dealing with him would have been easy to discover he didn't have a gun. The guy with the machete, though, this is a different scenario. He's entering somebody's car. Boom, 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 boom! He should have been shot there. I would have killed him. He was getting in someone's car. How did that guy get running down the street and only one officer is engaging him? Other officers are over there. Then he's shooting the guy. He almost gets chopped, and then the officer finally shoots him. That guy should have been shot dead much sooner.
Who are our next three speakers, please?
From Encino, Peter Bigbring, and Zach Sherwin.
Yeah. So the real guy you need to have up here is Attorney Jeffrey Ploden. Now that's your expert on this subject, because that's the nice gentleman. When you asshole cops get sued for all this excessive force, he's the one that goes to court and gets you guys off for nothing, sometimes for costs. He's the genius behind all of this. See, that's why he's not here. See, instead you put these clowns up here. This is just window dressing, crisis actors. You see, now let's be honest about it. If somebody's driving a car at you, are you going to get out of the way? If you got a gun? No. Somebody drives a car at you and you got a gun? You're going to shoot that motherfucker. That's what you're going to do. Right through the windshield. As much as that clip could empty, which is 15 plus 1, 16 and a Browder 9mm special. So don't give me that shit that you're going to stop that. Of course you're going to do it. What, are you going to bob out of the way? What is a fucking movie or something? What is this, the movie of the week? No, this is real life. I had somebody drive a car at me one time, a long time ago. Yeah, that motherfucker come at me. I go, come on, man, I'm in an alley. I can't go left. I can't go right. There's nowhere to get out of the way of that car. That son of a bitch come right at me. As hard as he could go in the fucking alley. Well, guess what happened? I'm here, and that motherfucker ain't here, is he? So again, that's why you need the Second Amendment. Cops got a Second Amendment. Cops got a Second Amendment.
You need to bring it back to the policy.
If somebody's driving a car at you and they're going to hit you, don't listen to these motherfuckers. You take that fucking gun out, you goddamn shoot and kill that motherfucker. You don't gob out of the way. It's a fucking car, motherfuckers.
Mr. Biebring and then Mr. Sherwin.
Good morning, Commissioners. Peter Biebring from the ACLU. I want to recognize this is a substantially improved policy. I do think this incorporates substantially all the feedback that the ACLU, BLM, the STOP Coalition, and YJC, and other groups offered last fall and again in the comment period. And I think it accurately states the law of AB 392, the higher necessary standard of that legislation, and makes a clear distinction between that higher necessary standard for deadly force and the reasonableness standard of constitutional law and the current governing standard for non-deadly force. I do want to recognize Mr. Singyangwe's comment about non-deadly force and best practices of minimal force. That is not in AB 392. It was not in our comment. It is in effect in a number of departments, and it is best practices. I would encourage the department to look at incorporating that. If not now, then in the revision that goes into incorporating SB 230. With respect to exhaustion of alternatives, I do hope that the way that this policy is written and the emphasis on other reasonable techniques and resources, that is substantially the same as the exhaustion of alternatives. I also just want to recognize the department and the commission for hearing the concerns about the process and changing course, taking public input, taking the time to digest the comments. And I think the result is a better policy and one that reflects the community concerns. I hope the commission will use a process like this for important policies going forward. And just last, I of course want to note this policy is much improved, and the use of force policy is of course crucial, but it's also the training and the application of the policy. And so we'll be looking forward to seeing how the department applies this and ensuring officers are held accountable if they violate it, and that the training accurately reflects this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sherwin.
I find this this report and this discussion dismaying, and it jumps out to me from the first sentence of it, in which it says that in the purpose section, the new law redefines the circumstances under which a homicide by a peace officer is deemed justifiable. And I say this not to make a clever point about language, but to underline that I really am struck by the fact that what we're talking about here is like improvements in definitions and language that are going to result in actual life and death consequences for people who are going to be most impacted by these policies, which are people of color, people of lower socioeconomic status, and many other more vulnerable categories. You know, the guiding principle when using force shall be reverence for human life. Very fresh in my mind is the murder of Victor Valencia, and I'm thinking about the lack of reverence for human life that was displayed in that incident. And it feels to me like what we're doing with this document is coming up with like better definitions for when, you know, deadly force and non-deadly force can be used. But to me, that doesn't strike at the real issue, which is this underlying problem with the way that officers engage with people like Victor Valencia and countless others that we've talked about already today. And, you know, hearing things like Commissioner Soboroff is most happy with the process of this, I think that's like a telling comment for us to hear, that this document is an administrative, are you taking notes on what I'm saying, Commissioner Soboroff? That this is an administrative papering over of a policy that's going to go in. But I also don't appreciate the comment, I'm sure everybody didn't get what they dreamed of. This isn't people dreaming of getting their feedback incorporated in the right way. It's like making actual change and making sure the police can kill fewer people. I find this a dismaying document, and I hope you vote to incorporate the comments that we heard from the gentleman from Citizen Zero.
Thank you, sir. The next.
Adam Smith, followed by Gina Viola and Hamid Khan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I really want to talk about the criticality of the totality of defining the feasibility of the defining definition of necessary and reasonable, because it's feasible that the totality of this new policy is it's just feasible. So I really appreciate all the work that's gone into saying those words a bunch of times. And we know that whatever words that you put on a page and approve today doesn't change what the LAPD is, what the LAPD is going to continue to do. How many years have there's been a policy about de-escalation? What has that really changed? Zach just mentioned Victor Valencia. When this recently demoted detective jumped out of his car on January 11th and shot Victor Valencia in the back in the middle of the day, it doesn't matter what the fucking policy is. you keep approving and expanding programs like PredPol and the iWatch, See Something, Say Something, suspicious activity reporting, you're going to continue to increase the point of contact with communities, with black communities in particular. And anytime LAPD continues to come in contact with black communities, violence occurs, erasure occurs, brutality and death occur. It doesn't matter what policy changes you make. How many changes have been made in the last 3 years with body cams, with de-escalation training? There were more murders by LAPD last year than the year before. I just can't believe that any of you, I mean, besides Steve, because he's an idiot, would actually believe that this stuff is making a difference.
Yeah, I have to echo much of what Adam was saying, that all of this language doesn't really change what happens in practice out there. You know, you mentioned that warning shots aren't something that are much of a concern, less than a handful of warning shots. Is that because officers are taught to shoot to kill? Is that why there are no warning shots? That stands out to me to be very significant. And was it a warning shot that killed Melly Corrado in the Trader Joe's, the innocent bystander that was shot when police opened fire inside of Trader Joe's? I see no mention of anything about anything like that in this report as well. Honestly, this just continues to justify the killing of black, brown, and poor people. It really does. Where was this protocol just weeks ago put into use during the execution of Victor Valencia, who's been mentioned here several times today? This document has been circulating now for months. I presume that while this is being created, some sort of training is being put into use with officers. But where was that training for Victor Valencia, who was unarmed, struggling with mental health issues, gunned down within seconds, and there was no attempt at de-escalation, no attempt to preserve his life? As long as you continue to use your predictive policing measures, PredPol, SARS, all the things that you're using, black, brown, and poor people will continue to be gunned down in this city. You're sending your officers out using predictive policing, telling them that they are in danger and that they can use this language to justify then killing people in those zones. That's what needs to come to a stop here.
Thank you. Mr. Khan.
You know, once you cut through the linguistic judo of totality of circumstances and reasonably perceived, feasible, necessary, reasonable, something that the whole spin on language that Adam lifted, there's a deep irony in this conversation that what we are being asked is to provide a feedback and a roadmap that how we should be killed, how we should be hurt, how we should be traumatized, how we should be injured. And then, of course, as, you know, having been around in the social justice movements for over 3 decades and so, you've seen that how nonprofits will pimp our community's trauma, how they will pimp our community's pain for political expediencies, for funding as well, just to look good. Because fundamentally, there's a deep belief within this white supremacist system that it can be fixed, it can be reformed. A white supremacist system that deems life and which has been created with the intent to cause harm. So, not going to repeat what others have said, but until we really get down to looking at the programs, and we'll keep on fighting it, because, you know, our fight is not just out there with these folks. And it's interesting to see that how many white people are sitting up there who are making decisions, and how white-driven organizations are now advocating for these kind of decisions as well. And ultimately, it's going to be the black and brown people, poor folks, residents of Skid Row, migrant populations who are going to be on the receiving end of this state violence. So the drama continues, but we're going to keep on fighting. But until PredPol and these programs are dismantled, you can have all the use of force policy in the books. It's going to be the same thing, same injury, same harm, same trauma, same murder, and the same old bullshit that you're going to continue. But we'll fight back, and it will be dismantled.
Thank you. There are a few things that I'd like to ask the department to follow up on before entertaining motions. First, and perhaps most obviously, the courts will obviously be interpreting this statute in the months and years ahead. Please keep informed as to those decisions to ensure our written policy is reflective of the court's interpretation of the statute. Secondly, there were some public comments made about best practices around the state. I'd like to ask the department to look into those and to report back to the Use of Force Committee on those best practices. And specifically, I think San Francisco was mentioned, perhaps a few other jurisdictions, but I'd ask you to look into that. Finally, some comments reflected questions on training. I know in our December 17th meeting, there was information provided on training. I don't want to get into all of that again, but I wonder if what was articulated in the December meeting still remains in effect in terms of the training moving forward. Chief Baiza, is that just accurate? Again, without going into all those
yes,
details.
ma'am, it is accurate.
Okay. With that, the request or the recommended board action is to file and receive the executive director's report and approve the department's report. I will make a motion to that effect. Is there a second?
I'll second, but I do have one question. Assuming that after the department looks into the best practices that there are additional recommendations, what would that process entail?
It would first go to the use of force subcommittee, and then it would be presented to the board as a full.
Madam President, if I may comment just a moment on the observations of Citizen Zero and agree that a minimum amount of force is what we desire. And in fact, within our manual, under management principles, the use of the minimum amount of use of force is a requirement. And so the interpretation of this by the Citizen Zero group, we look forward to working with them to point out within our manual, within our training, within our existing policies. Secondly, relative to reasonable alternatives being exhausted, again, we believe that this is an area of de-escalation and that this is, it may not use the same word, but again, we look forward, just as this process has, to bring light to our proposals in response to changes in state law and certainly to community member concerns. And I would look forward to an opportunity to meet with members of Citizen Zero to see if there's further work that we can do to satisfy their concerns.
And to ensure that the policies and the wording of the policies reflect what you're saying, but also what they're suggesting, and perhaps just greater clarity may be important to provide all of those policies and memorandums that you're referencing.
Yeah, and we understand the perspective, and we think that a further conversation can help bring us to the same conclusion.
Very good. Commissioner, did you have a question?
I appreciate your openness to that, Chief, and willingness to meet with Citizen Zero. I'd love to hear how that meeting goes and what specific recommendations come out of that beyond what was suggested today. I know that the two best practices they talked about are kind of alluded to in different words, or in some cases using the same words in the management manual and other documents, and just encourage, if that is acceptable and appropriate department practice, that we just lift it up in the form of policy to provide a level of transparency and accountability to the community and clarity to the officers who have to interpret the multiple documents.
Thank you. So there's a motion pending which has been seconded. Pending no further comment or questions from the commission. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? 0. It passes 3-0. Moving then, thank you all, and again, thank you to all members of the public who were both here today commenting and those that provided written comments. Moving on then to item 1B, which is the department's report relative to the BolaWrap pilot project. Again, this matter was heard, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ting-Fang, early January. We heard the matter, received a report from the department, opened it for public comment. And my understanding, Mr. Tiefenk, is that there have been no public comments offered.
That's correct.
Okay. In which case, unless members of the commission have further questions of the department, we already heard the matter, we already asked questions. I'll just move to public comment today and then proceed as the commission chooses. Madam Secretary, are there public comment cards today on item 1B?
Yes, we have two. Jonathan Foster, followed by Wayne from Encino.
Mr. Foster.
On January 14th.
Record this onto a second device.
There we go.
Situations that we look at now, there's a, boy, we wish we would have had this in this case and that case. I mean, I think of the shooting that happened in the mall, where that just in Crenshaw Mall. I think of some of these knife situations.
Did you not remember his name, Steve? His name is Gresario Mack. Listen again.
Other situations that we look at now, there's a, boy, we wish we would have had this in this case and that case. I mean, I think of the shooting that happened in the mall, where that just.
Mr. Foster.
What's his name?
Mr. Foster.
What's his name, Steve?
Sir, do you have a question?
Say his name, Gresario Mack! Gresario Mack! Gresario Mack, say his name!
Mr. Foster.
Gresario Mack is his name, Steve!
Mr. Foster, sir, you need to address the policy at hand, sir, please.
He was talking on Bolero. He doesn't remember Gresario Mack's name. They shot him dead. They could have used a bolo wrap. Same as Victor Valencia. He was just sitting there. They didn't call the police. It says that the helicopter guys called the police department. Get out of here! Same thing as Gresario Mack. They shot him and they let him die down there. He was talking about they could have maybe used the bolo wrap on Gresario Mack, but the idiot doesn't remember his name! Is he a nobody? We know you're a nobody. Look at me. I was sitting here too. They shot Victor Valencia, and I tried to remember Gresario Mack's name, and then everybody doesn't respond to me, so nobody told me his name, and a couple minutes later, I did remember it. But you're on the council! Jerk!
Mr. Spindler.
How about that? What a happy place. So we're going to use Saran wrap. We're going to wrap them up, which is good. We should be wrapping them up. Saves the body bags, doesn't it, Steve? Yes. You're just going to wrap them up with little twist ties and wrap them up a little bowl of wrap. What a cute little pretty way to do police enforcement, right? Yeah. Yeah, look at that. Look at the billionaire look away. Yes. It's up to you, Steve. You're the bolo wrap guy. You like the bolo wrap. The bolo wrap pilot. Yes, we're gonna have a pilot program with another use of some sort of force, because we can't train our officers correctly in proper de-escalation and self-defense techniques like I was trained 31 years ago. No, we can't do that. No, we can't teach a cop 6'4", 250 to take down a little tiny fucking guy with tiny little hands. No, we have to have deadly weapons and helicopters and machine guns and tasers and lasers and all kinds of shit. And then, of course, 5G's coming, Steve. That's why you need 5G, Steve, because then they can take and point those beams at people's fucking heads and give them fucking cancer of the brain. Call that self-defense. See, it's all about techno-policing. The future of policing. RoboCop. So, bolo wrap them up. Then they can't get their hands, their hands are between their body, and then all of a sudden they have a circulation condition, Steve. Help, Steve. Help, I need to get this bolo wrap off of me. I'm having a stroke. See, that never works. Train your fucking officers to be cops. They're a bunch of well-paid security guards, and they're
Thank you, sir. The requested board action is to approve the department's report. I'll make that motion. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Passes 3-0. Moving on then to item 1C. Chief Rodriguez, are you here, sir? We've read are there questions for the chief, by the way?
No, sir. Nope.
There are no questions on the commendations. Are there public comment cards?
Yes, we have two, Jonathan Foster and Wayne from Encino.
These are for commendations, sir. Thank you.
Is it on? He said, I'm going to yell at you. He doesn't decide if I'm yelling at you or not. It's amazing that there's 10 or 15, maybe 20 million people, and I think the human trafficking could be in the 10,000, 20,000 per year. Seems like a small number, but it's really large, and 10,000, 20,000 people a year, something like that. Always seems like it's girls, people in a down and out. Just keep up the good work on this that you can. It's too bad that this is taking place, that the oil industry that's got so much money isn't doing better in the locations they're taking the oil from, and then the people in those areas are being, fractured. They think it'd be trafficked. So just keep up that good work. This is a tough situation, very tough. The Homeland Security, the border issue, and what's going on in Congress could really knock this out and take a huge weight off the LAPD. But that's a different topic. Obviously, probably is off topic if I talk about what's really happening. But please keep up that great work, because these people being used, and I personally can't understand how a person goes up to somebody and says, "I'll use you down there if you come." I just can't get that around. I can't get my mind around that. So keep up the good work on that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Spindler.
Yes, I recommend nobody. Nobody. You have failed, Valley Bureau. You have failed. I have the videos to prove you failed here. Where? The Sepulveda Basin. What? Camps with underage girls being prostituted on Burbank Boulevard between Woodley and Havenhurst. I have the videos. Even an underage girl gave birth in that fucking trees and forest over there. You don't do nothing. You know where the little girls are being prostituted, you fucking dirty cops, you know. And the women cops are the fucking worst. And Beatrice knows this, She knows
Sir, you need
they're
to
the
stay
fucking
on
worst.
topic, which is the commendations
That's what I'm
being
talking
offered
about.
to these particular
Every time.
officers.
Every time the guy screams at Steve, he doesn't even get a warning.
It's a
No.
narrow topic on this
It's
item,
not a narrow
which is with
topic.
respect to these
Valley
particular
fucking
officers.
human trafficking we're talking about. You want to
Civic
give
officers,
awards for failure. I'm saying no. For once, Chief. These people have failed the Valley. They have failed young women. They're being prostituted at record numbers in the 6th District and the 7th District. We see them all the time. In fact, what your cops do, they drive up and down Sepulveda Boulevard, north and south. They go across Roscoe. They pull people over and plant shit in their cars, calling themselves a task force.
And now you're off
See,
topic.
you're full of
It's
shit
about the
because
actions
they
of these
falsely
particular
accuse
officers
people of
who
being
have been offered a
Johns.
commendation,
I
sir.
know what fucking goes on in policing in the Valley. You've never been to the Valley. Go to the goddamn Valley, and then you'll know what you're talking about. You don't know shit, Decker, about anything you're talking about.
All right. The requested board action is to approve the department's report. I will make that motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. The next two items, D and E, relate to veterinary services. And are there representatives from the department on this item? If you could come forward, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Deputy Chief Peter Zarcone from CTSOB.
Good morning. James Astron, Senior Management Analyst Officer in charge of Contract Section, Fiscal Operations Department.
Good morning. As I understand these two matters, they're different but certainly related. One is related to sending out the RFP to continue the veterinary services needed for the canines. The other is to continue the current contract while that RFP is pending. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In summary, I understand in the latest iteration, no potential contractors came to the meeting. Did I read that material correctly?
In the original RFP in 2013, that
Oh,
was
in the
my
original one.
understanding.
Oh, okay. But this is a new process, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Very well. Commissioners, do you have any questions on items D or E?
No.
No? Is there anything further you wish to, I mean, we've all read the materials, but I just want to be sure if
Nothing
there's anything
further.
else you wanted to say. Very well. Are there public comment cards on items D and E?
Yes, we have one on each, both Wayne from Encino.
There we go. Thank you, Blondie Bear. Now, Canine Veterinary Services. These poor little dogs that you torture in the back of those canine cars. I've seen them. They're in the back
Again,
of those
you're off
cars.
topic, sir. This is about providing veterinary services for the canines.
For canines.
That doesn't mean everything
Yes,
is open.
I'm talking
Canines
about K
means the
dash
specific contracts.
fucking nines. The same canines that are using in the back of your canine vehicles that need this veterinary care, because you're abusing these canines. That's why they need all of this excessive care. Those poor little guys, they spend hours in the back of those SUVs. You don't take them out. You don't give them proper water and proper exercise. The dogs get dysplasia far earlier. You don't know how to care for animals. You guys abuse animals. You treat them worse than the people on Skid Row, in fact. And they're in the back there. I hear them all the time, don't you? And that means I want to get out and run. I want to get out and get some water. I'm too hot in the back of this car. I'm too cold in the back of this car. Then the best part is you bring the dogs home with stressed out police officers to care for them. And the dog learns behavior from that traumatic experience of the vibe. A goddamn handler is a cop, a stressed out cop. The dog becomes more escalated towards other people. Why? Because I was over last week. I saw how you handle the canines. And you don't do it like the Sheriff's Department does it. The Sheriff's Department, Mr. Villanueva, does a wonderful job caring for his animals. He doesn't need supplementary emergency veterinary care, because that's what the fuck this is. You are hiding animal abuse under the guise of giving them better care. That's why you need more money for veterinary care. You don't need, these are strong, young, healthy animals, and they are well-trained and specially bred. You do not need to have them constantly going in for emergency care unless what? Unless they're being fucking abused, which is what you're doing. And then you take and open the door finally, and you tell the dog, go get the suspect. That's what it sounds like. Yes, that's my arm. Bye-bye. And then that's my hand. You see, you don't treat these dogs nice. They're going to bite people. They're going to get liability. You are a bunch of terrorists, LAPD. Stop using dogs for
Thank you, sir. The recommended board action on item D is to approve the department's report. I'll move that forward.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. It passes. And on item E, it's to approve the department's report and transmit to the mayor. I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. It passes 3-0 as well. Moving to item F then, the request for a professional services agreement regarding advertising for bail bond services. Are there questions from the commission on this item? No questions. Are there public comment cards on this item?
We have three, Michael Novak, Wayne from Encino, and Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Novak, please. Sir.
So for the people who aren't aware, this is a motion to allow a private company to put advertising inside police stations of bail services. The state of California attempted to eliminate cash bail. That's been stalled because of suits and an attempt to get a ballot measure by the people who make their money out of cash bail. I think that it's inappropriate in general. I think this is a classic example of public-private partnerships where public resources are being put to the benefit of private corporations. This is a company that makes its money by selling advertising space to bail, so-called insurance companies. The problem is that too many people are being locked up and kept in prison because there's a cash bail that keeps them locked up. And so I think that the Board of Police Commissioners should reject this proposed contract and reject the whole concept of having paid advertising inside police stations for anything, certainly for bail, and that you should go on record urging the elimination of cash bail because too many innocent people are forced into accepting plea deals to crimes they did not commit because their lives are completely disrupted because they've been arrested and being held for bail that they can't make. And I think that it's unconscionable for you to allow the department to make additional money. They claim they're using it for the inmate welfare fund, but it's, again, these are funds going to the LAPD, which already soaks up an enormous amount of the budget of the city unnecessarily. And if these people want to advertise, let them advertise somewhere else, not inside police precincts. And I don't think that the whole concept of public-private partnerships is a viable or acceptable one. I think it's about corrupting the public sphere by turning it into private profit interests. And I think this is a really outrageous example of it.
Sir, Mr. Foster, or excuse me, Mr. Spindler's next.
Yes, proud user of bail bond services in the last 4 years. Thank you, Steve. You were the first one that had to be falsely arrested that 4-year period.
Sir, please
you
have
Jew
your comments
fuck.
directed
Now,
to the agreement.
You know, when you're in the goddamn jail, you can't dial a 1-800 number for the bond agency. 1-800, no cuffs. Can't dial it in the jail.
Sir, please direct your
I'm
comments
talking about the ability to go for fucking calling for bail, you cunt. Let me explain. I'm trying to explain. Stop interrupting.
matter,
I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it.
on the
Jesus
matter
Christ,
on the agenda,
fucking
sir.
stop talking for a second. Silence. When you have the list, thank you. The fucking list has local numbers. You can't dial a 1-800 number for any of the bond companies. When you're in custody, Chief, why? 1-800, no cuffs. I dialed it. I couldn't get through. So there's a little tiny sign. It's got a little tiny print. You can't read it. You have to look through, all the way through the glass, and try to look at the numbers and dial a local number. You have no pen to write with, Eileen. You have no number. I've went through this 5 times thanks to you people. One, I had to post a $75,000 bond. Thank God for VIP bonds. They gave me 8%. I'd be dead now. Thank God. May 13th, 2016. Then I had your fucking arrest, Steve. November 2015.
Again, you need to
$5,000
address the
bond.
matter on the agenda.
I'm talking about the ability to post bond. Let
deviated
people
from the
dial
contract
800
before
numbers,
this
give them a
commission.
pen, and let them see the sun.
Sir, your time is up, sir. Mr. Foster, you're next. Mr. Spindler, your time is up. Please have a seat.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. I second Mr. Novak's comments. And if this is a public service, even arrest and going into jail, I wondered how the jails were privately owned, some of them. And if it's a public service, then shouldn't the taxpayer pay to present bail information to the person that was arrested? So we should, you know.
I can't hear him because Spindler's acting
Mr.
out.
Spindler, you need to stop interrupting
Sure,
the
it's
meeting,
not the
sir.
strongest testimony. I just do struggle with the concept, though, from what I read, and I wouldn't approve
Thank you, sir. I believe that's all the public comment that's before us. The requested action is to approve the department's report and transmit to the mayor. I'll make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Aye. Passes 3-0. Chief, report of the Chief of Police, please.
Good morning, Madam President, members of the Commission, Inspector General. This past week, there were no officer-involved shootings or other categorical uses of force. I want to thank the members of the community, some here today, as well as the Harbor San Pedro area for the turnout at last Thursday night's Police Commission meeting. Appreciate the presentations and the information that was provided, an opportunity for us to talk with the Harbor community. Additionally, on Friday, I participated in the James Monroe Police Academy Magnet Program inspection, joined by Deputy Chief Rodriguez and other members of the command staff from Valley Bureau. It was an opportunity to see the Monroe, that high school in their 4 years of various each of the classes in the participation in the Magnet Program and building the leaders of tomorrow. On Saturday, participated in the Chinese New Year parade in Chinatown. It was it was lightly attended this year. This is an annual event, and the events that are occurring with the virus that has been reported beginning in mainland China, and now concerns about its spread into portions here in the United States and other parts of the world, I do believe did have a dampening effect on the attendees. On Sunday, I attended with Cindy the West Angeles Cathedral church services, and with Bishop Blake and his ministry. It was a good morning to be there and see the community and engage in those services. Lastly, in regards to significant events, this last week, Chief Kamala and other members of the department have been working closely with our emergency management department and other parts of city government, including the fire department and LA County Health, in evaluating our existing protocols and our response plan relative to the recent reported outbreak of and I'm going to mess this up, the coronavirus. So the coronavirus and its impact on traveling, international travel. Los Angeles LAX has been identified as one of